Hi, Cheryl. Can you hear me?
Hi, Dr. Muller. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
How are you doing
I'm
today?
very well. How are you?
I'm doing okay, thanks. Hanging in there. It's all we can do sometimes.
That's all we can do. That's kind of how I feel too. I spent the weekend moving my 94-year-old parents into a continuing care retirement community, and I
Oh,
am so sore this morning. I can hardly move.
is it local?
Well, it's in Columbia,
Okay.
uh, but uh, so very apropos given our reading for tonight's.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I feel like,
Oh, that's nice. And I'm assuming that they're fairly
well,
healthy then.
my, yeah, I mean, for their age, they're remarkable and they're still living independently.
That's great.
My stepdad really initiated this, and my mother has been reluctant. And part of
Hmm.
her problem is she has short-term memory loss. So
Oh.
one minute she says yes and she's very happy and everything's fun and she's picking out paint colors and everything else, and the next minute she's very confused and she doesn't know where she is. And
Yeah,
so
that's hard.
yeah, it really is, it really is. But I think we're gonna, the sooner they can get just settled, like she called
Hmm.
me today, she said, "Oh, we got the television connected, the phones are working, and Brent is on his computer." And I said, "Mother, that's fantastic. That's great. Now go take a nap."
That's amazing. At 94?
Oh
Wow.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
And I'm sure that she stood hovering over the workers for 6 hours straight, probably trying to even tell them how to do it.
Oh, that's awesome though.
Yeah. Do you have, uh, are your parents, well, you're so young, your parents are probably,
My dad passed away in 2013
oh, oh, wow.
of complications from prostate cancer. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
it really shouldn't have happened, and it did.
Oh,
So,
really?
and my mom is still alive. She'll be 86 in September, and she does great. She lives alone in a condo and
She's
drives, and
here
she
in,
does everything. Yeah, so she's completely independent, which is great.
yeah, yeah. Well, when my older brother was home weekend before last, he actually stole a set of car keys from Brent. And I mean, that's just not the way to do it. Like Brent said,
Right.
well, heck, I'd go rent a car if he had stolen both sets.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't accept that.
Yeah. You have to be forthcoming with those kind of things and
Yeah,
talk about it.
absolutely. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Now my mom still drives. She does okay. I question her reflexes a little bit, but she lives in Florida. I have a sister that lives down there and sees her every day. And
oh,
so they're monitoring her, and
yeah.
they're better judges of when she would be not ready to drive. But she if she didn't drive, it wouldn't be good because she'd be too isolated.
Well, that's the thing. See, that's what I kept telling my brothers and sister, which was a large part the rationale for moving them to this community, because they don't have to drive. But they can still socialize.
Right.
They were in a high-rise apartment, and my brother was trying to get Meals on Wheels delivered to them and in-home care, and they were miserable because they felt like shut-ins.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
it's really a balancing act,
it is.
and
And I think communication is the key, but if they're able to and can make the decisions, and I think that's so important.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's see. I heard somebody else log in.
I think it's Crystal and Mary.
That's funny because I can't see them.
Oh, you can't see them. Last week, at when you started doing your slide, I could not see them. I could only see you, which now I can see everyone. So I don't know why that happened.
Okay,
It
so
was weird.
does everybody see the big chapter 8 slide on the screen?
I do.
Yeah.
Okay. And Crystal's driving.
Yes, Crystal's driving.
Yes, oh my God. We're just talking about driver safety, and
I know.
I'm not supposed to see this.
I try to get home on time and it never works.
I know. Well, you have to do what you can do. And
Yeah. So I just bring my notes with me when I leave home for the day. So.
And Mary, you can hear us. We can't see you. Can you activate your video, or are you doing something you don't want us to see? It's just us gals, so if you want to do both or anything. Okay. All right. Well, while we're waiting for Chuck, because I always want to be mindful of your time, I wanted to tell you all just how thrilled I was. I mean, really thrilled by the quality of your papers and infographics. I have given this assignment or something very similar to this several times to previous classes, including 2 graduate classes. And what you all produced was of a much higher quality than anything that has been produced before and submitted. And I was just so pleased. I was pleased by A+ papers on the one hand, and that followed a rather traditional path. And I was also delighted to see infographics that demonstrated a great deal of planning and thought and creativity. That's what's really fun about the infographic. You can literally grab images and create a story visually. And I hope you had fun doing that. Any questions or comments about my feedback? Was everybody able to find my feedback? Because of the way you all submitted your papers or whatever. If it was just a Word document, it was easy to insert track changes. In the case of the infographics, because those were actually in the cloud and I couldn't comment on your work directly inside the cloud, I created a Word document. And I think one of you, maybe I did some hybrid version of that. But did everybody find comments for me? Because I wrote fairly comments. Okay.
I did. Thank you.
I found my comment.
Yeah, I did.
I did.
As well.
Okay, great. And, feel free to share with each other what you did. I leave it up to you, but I just think that everything that you came up, that you produced, Jordan had a very creative approach to her topic, going with a pesticide-free, antibiotic-free path for healthier living, and that was very an unexpected choice and kind of fun to read. And just to point out one thing, I did want to make a couple of sort of general comments, and they were kind of issues that surfaced, or not so much issues, but I guess key points that I wanted to make sure, because they surfaced several times. Several of you, when you made reference to, doing research to find out about, how patients feel. It's really important as you go on in life, and you all are looking at this as a professional pathway, to be sure that you question everything. So a survey a survey should always be validated, and what that means is that you are actually obtaining what you intend to obtain. And sometimes researchers have to test a survey instrument, for example, to make sure that the way they worded a certain question has been indeed interpreted as they intended by the patient. And so there are multiple steps that you go through in doing that. I also wanted to emphasize that there really is a vast body of literature or published research, in other words, that the patient socio-demographic characteristics do indeed affect patient satisfaction. In other words, older patients in general are going to be more satisfied with their doctors than younger generation patients. And that is just because of sort of the culture we have. The older generation came along when doctors were sort of considered gods, and they looked to their doctors to tell them what to do and, tell them what they should do, and they just believed in everything the doctor said. And we younger, I'll put myself in this category, younger generations have learned that doctors are human beings too, and doctors have biases, and doctors have opinions, and in fact, some doctors might even be adversely impacted or influenced by commercial interest. This is this whole area of whether there were kickbacks or paybacks or special incentives or special trips or whatever supplied by companies if only a certain device or pharmaceutical agent was recommended. So it's important to recognize the possibility of this so that you don't just accept any and every finding or conclusion. And the other thing to remember, this was probably one of the first things that I learned as I started pursuing my doctorate in health services research, was that there is never a single definitive study that you can't just hang your hat on one paper that's been published and make that the be all and the end all. There will always be another side. There'll be other, if for no other reason, life evolves and new technologies, new events, whatever, come out and influence what all of us do. And so one of the very frustrating things for those of us who have done research and that we sought to publish in healthcare is there's a desire to sort of say, I found it, eureka, here's the answer. But researchers are by nature, they should be always cautious and at the end say, there need to be additional studies to verify or reconfirm what we found in our study from the subjects that we looked at, or these additional areas or variables that we didn't consider or take into consideration perhaps represent an important body of future research that will be undertaken. So just always be sure that you, regardless of how strongly you feel in taking a strong position, which is good to have a position and support it with facts and figures, but also acknowledge that there is still another side, there may be another facet, and sort of give credence to the full picture. That there always, you don't want to have a sort of blinders on like that. And
I think to that fact too, healthcare is ever changing. So there's always going to be more studies and more evidence to work on.
That's absolutely right. And so the question about the patient satisfaction, the reason why I worded the question the way I did was to help you sort of take a position, but also acknowledge that it is valid to have different perspectives, both the patient's perspective on quality as well as the provider's perspective. And in fact, because there is a care team involved, a nurse's perspective on how a patient was cared for and dealt with may be different from the doctor's. So you need to get everybody who's on the care team as well as the patient. And in many cases include family members, because sometimes the family members' experiences may be just as important as that of a patient, particularly a very sick or elderly patient who may have advanced dementia or that sort of thing. The interaction between the family and the providers may be the central issue to address. And so be sure to always think about provider in a totalitarian, in a total kind of comprehensive way, not just one individual. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and this was a comment on more than one of your papers, is healthcare is a world of its own, just like every industry sector. It has its own acronyms, it has its own vocabulary, and as you, again, preparing to be preparing for management position in a professional capacity, it's important that you try to use that vocabulary and those terms and use them appropriately. And that's one of the reasons why actually I assigned the supplemental reading, because the more you read published literature and even articles in widely read journals in the field, the more you will start to pick up almost by osmosis those terms like evidence-based medicine, evidence-based practice. Those are terms that are just tossed around constantly, but they're important and they're very central to communicating what you intend to say. So, and while I don't expect you to know all those terms right off the bat, and they're always changing, they're in, as new principles and concepts and studies come out, all of a sudden there'll be a new phrase that's created, and all of a sudden that gets traction. So, but all of them were just great. And I hope you all felt good about your experiences.
I actually enjoyed writing the paper. I wrote a paper, obviously, you know that, but because I didn't want to even tackle the infographic, that was a little too daunting for me. But I did enjoy researching and writing the paper.
Well, I know there is no question in my mind that all of you spent a lot of time, whether you wrote an essay or whether you dove in and learned a new piece of software and played around with it and made it work for you. You all spent a lot of time, and I could definitely tell that by the quality of work. I didn't, and also you proofed it. I didn't see glaring errors and dangling sentences and things like that. So all very, very professionally executed. So thank you. Okay, so let's just dive right into the questions, and then we'll, I hope that's Chuck. Chuck, are you on?
I think that was mine.
I don't think Chuck is with us. Then okay, maybe not. Who has 3248 as the last 4 digits of your number? Okay, well, we have a mysterious party listening to our class. All right. Well, I hope he or she enjoys the dialogue. So let's just jump right in. So these two chapters had to do with the world of hospital care, inpatient facilities and services, and the evolution of the hospital sector or segment, if you will, and then long-term care and the impact of the changing demographics in our country. So just to start out, so what are the main forces on hospitals that have resulted in a reduction in the total number of hospital beds in the U.S.? We used to be completely oriented to care in hospitals.
Mhm. One of the things is the declining utilization of the healthcare beds. So people are going other places besides into the hospitals. They're finding other ways of getting the care.
And why are they finding other ways of getting care? How is that occurring? Why is that occurring?
Well, I think part of it is patient satisfaction. It could be their doctor might be associated or affiliated with a particular place that maybe isn't hospital-based, and they want to follow their physician. Those are just some of the things I think that have a result in that. Also, insurance too. Their insurance coverage or lack thereof.
And also more outpatient services.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need the beds because outpatient services, they're having the treatments done and they are sent back home. So they don't, the decline in beds are caused by that as well.
Right. It's the medical technology that is allowing procedures or services to be done in an outpatient setting.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of surgeries that are done and the kinds of surgeries that are done now in outpatient are mind-boggling to me because, I feel like patients are going home sicker. I mean, they're recovering fine, but they're going home a lot quicker and sicker than they were many, many years ago. But they're recovering okay. It's just interesting to me,
Crystal, you were trying to jump in on that.
I was kind of saying the same thing. They're recovering at home by themselves now more. Kind of the same thing that Cheryl was just saying.
Yeah, and what has exerted pressure? What force or trend has exerted pressure to push patients out of the hospital quicker and sicker?
I believe that probably have to do with some of the Medicare regulations and charges and reimbursing.
You're absolutely right, Mary. It's the managed care and also the way Medicare has started reimbursing back in the late 80s. Yeah, specifically a fixed amount of money up front based on a patient's diagnosis upon admission, and that was based on a fixed number of days. And so if the hospital could get you pushed out sooner, they got to pocket the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's been a lot more hospital closures causing, like you said, economic constraints to where outpatient services are, it just makes more sense.
Right. So closures that's a very interesting issue because what types of hospitals have been closing?
Rural hospitals, for one thing.
That's right, Mary. And why have rural hospitals been more likely to close than inner city hospitals?
Harder to get the employees, the workers.
Well,
that's there if
that's
it's far away.
Part. The population is much smaller, so how would that translate into the size of a hospital in rural areas?
It's probably a smaller hospital.
Right. And the smaller hospitals, are they likely to be less efficient or more efficient?
Less efficient, probably less technology, less advanced technology.
That's true.
Less beds.
I'm sorry, Mary?
I said less number of less number of beds they will have.
Yeah, they have fewer beds. There's still certain costs, like overhead. They still have to have somebody there for admissions. They still have to have record keeping and that sort of thing. And so there's a certain amount of overhead. And if you're spreading that overhead across fewer beds, what does that do to the profits?
It decreases them.
Right. So the rural hospitals were less profitable and less able to serve all the needs of the patients because of, I think one of you said, less technology. Yeah. So good. Yeah. All those. And so how would employment in hospitals have been influenced over the years? How have the types of jobs in hospitals changed?
Well, they have been influenced by the organizational structures of the hospital. How the jobs are falling, like some jobs fall under administrative, such as the nursing and the pharmacists,
Right. Well,
diagnostic technicians.
Mhm.
How the organization is structured.
right. Now, and that's true. There are different types of positions. But one thing that has happened over the years, not entirely due to the Affordable Care Act, but it was exacerbated by the Affordable Care Act, was the reporting requirements for hospitals has greatly increased, and that has increased the number of what kinds of workers?
The IT people and those kind of technologically savvy folks.
But also
Administrative.
administrative
Mhm.
and people that are not directly involved in direct patient care.
Mhm.
And so, again, those types of jobs become part of the overhead because you can't bill an IT guy to a patient. You know, you can't put the IT guy or woman on a patient's bill per se, but it does become embedded in the overhead, and it's implicit in the charges, but it causes the per diem charge to be much higher.
I think also, Dr. Muller, the patient load for, say, nurses was also increased greatly. So they were decreasing the amount of nurses, but increasing the amount of patients. So, the care was becoming more worrying about the computers and things like that, and really less hands-on. And that's a lot of the reason why I think a lot of nurses have left the hospital setting is for that reason,
Yeah.
And the pay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are the others? What do the rest of you think about the types of jobs? What are your thoughts there?
I think, the types of jobs, excuse me. I think the change really, like she says, a lot of it is the pay. I mean, the pay and the workload. A lot of even nurses are going to something to where they can, even like urgent care, or they're doing something that they don't have to, they have better working hours, better pay.
There's something else that not just hospitals, but other provider organizations have done in order to try to curtail their own direct patient care cost. What is that? Who are the extenders, the so-called extenders in healthcare? What are some examples of extenders?
You mean like home health or occupational therapy or those kind of people?
No, that would be like a physician's assistant.
Okay, yeah.
Nursing facilities.
Supplement.
Nurse practitioner, whatever.
Exactly. So a nurse practitioner, advanced practice nurse, physician assistant who could see patients in lieu of a doctor always seeing them. They work under the so-called supervision. It's of a physician, at least in most states. In this state, for example, nurse practitioners, except in rural areas, have to a physician has to have some presence in order for them to write prescriptions. What are some other examples of extensions? They're really extenders in many professions these days. They're like assistant occupational therapists, assistant physical therapists that are not paid at as high a level. Their training is not as extensive. Their licensing requirements are not quite as burdensome in terms of continuing ed, but they help to lower the overall cost of direct patient care. And these are all changes that have come about.
I'm sorry, Dr. Muller. I apologize for being late. I was at a high school graduation, just got back.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I don't know where I caught up, so have you guys talked about?
We just were discussing the first question about forces on hospitals. And yeah, you're cool.
Okay.
And we'll just talk about these questions, and then we'll go through this quickly the slides for chapter 8.
Did you discuss locum tenens and travel nurses as well?
No, that's another good one. Yeah. And nurse midwives.
Yep.
Nurse midwives have been around for quite a while, but they're regaining some ground and getting new traction, which is quite exciting. Nurse midwives delivered my babies 30 years ago, and that was a very rare thing then.
I don't think I would want to do that job. I think it would be scary.
I would love to be a nurse midwife. I really wish that I had done that. I can't think of anything more exciting than delivering a baby. Okay, so this is a rather dry question, but it's sort of central to understanding the structure of the healthcare system, particularly if you're going to look at from different perspectives of ways that hospitals can be classified. So what are the different ways that a hospital can be classified?
Well, the first one was classification of ownership,
Right.
like a public hospital, private nonprofit, or
Right.
private for-profit hospitals.
Types of service.
Types of service. So what would be some examples there?
General hospital, specialty, psychiatric, rehab, and children's hospitals.
Right. Yeah. And there might be a special surgery kind of hospital, like an orthopedic hospital, or a number of for-profit corporations actually went into these areas of specialty services, like cardiac surgery, or for the minimally invasive, like maybe a pacemaker kind of implant, and including cardiology with diagnostic scanning and so forth. What are some other types or categories?
Trauma level?
Sorry, Chuck, what did you say?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said trauma level, level 1, 2, or 3.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and sometimes that can be an important way of let's say that you want to justify adding a certain service. Some years ago, the Medical University of South Carolina was lobbying to get back into the burn center business. They had closed their burn center, but they were the only level 3 trauma center in this area, and they didn't have a burn unit. Our burn patients had to be transported by helicopter. And so there was justification to say, hey, if you're a level 3 trauma center, you've got to have a burn unit. Jordan, any other thoughts on some even more categories that we haven't touched on?
Community hospital?
A university hospital, like a teaching hospital? Is that what you said, Mary?
Yes,
That Mary?
yes.
Yeah, good. Absolutely, absolutely. And then what about location?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, location
Class and by the length of stay.
of stay.
Yeah, so it
Bed.
might
And
location, a rural versus inner city hospital by
Mhm.
length of stay. You might have a long-term hospital or
stay.
a short-term rehab hospital versus acute care community hospital. What does community hospital mean to you all? What did our textbooks, how did it define community hospital?
It's like a public access hospital. So it's more for the public, the general public. Sorry.
Yeah,
And they provide kinds of services.
right, Mary. The community hospital offers a broad array of services that the general population in a community is likely to need. So it doesn't necessarily have to offer every service and every type of procedure, but certainly basics like a community hospital, one would expect to have labor and delivery, because labor and delivery is something that every community, virtually every community has, if it's self-sustaining. Internal medicine would be another type of service that one would expect to see in every community hospital. Whereas every community hospital may not have a children's or pediatric wing or a center. Roper St. Francis here in Charleston is considered a community hospital, but it doesn't have a children's hospital.
I'm not sure if we are at swing bed hospitals already as well.
Yeah, swing bed is a special category, and it was created largely for those small hospitals in rural areas that serve relatively small populations, and they were at risk of closing, but there were no other nearby alternatives for the people. So a swing bed means that there's certain beds that if you need for them to be skilled nursing, for somebody that needs some long-term care at a skilled level with at least RN level training, providing care and being present 24/7. But then depending on the numbers that walk in the door, maybe you could also put an acute care patient in that bed. Not the same bed while you had a skilled patient. Once the skilled patient moves out. So in other words, most facilities, the standard approach is that it's licensed to have so many beds of a fixed type. But there was this exception made in order to prevent these smaller hospitals that otherwise were not very profitable and difficult to keep open, to keep them open and functional by giving them more flexibility. So the swing bed hospital has to do with a special exception or allowance from a licensing point of view to allow flexibility. That's what that means.
Another one was the multi-unit affiliation. So when there's two or more hospitals that are owned by a general
Right.
kind of company or organization.
And then there's been a trend in that direction, consolidation, right? So they could share certain administrative tasks like sharing procurement. So whether somebody is buying 1,000 rolls of gauze or 10 rolls of gauze, it's still just one purchase order. Okay. Any other comments about types of hospitals? Yeah, one of the parts of that question was the Affordable Care Act closed the door on future physician-owned hospitals. And that went into effect in January of 2011. if they wanted to participate in Medicare and receive payments for patients on Medicare. Do you think that's a good restriction? What do you all think about that? Jordan, are you following us? Can you hear us okay? Can everybody? Jordan,
I don't think she can hear you.
I don't think so either. Huh. Jordan, can you hear us? Can you raise your hand if you can hear us? Huh. I don't understand why she can't hear us.
Mm.
Trying to,
I answered that question as no.
You don't think it's a good reason?
I mean, I have mixed emotions about it, honestly. It's hard for me to think about a lot of restrictions on anything, to be honest with you. I guess it just depends. I didn't know how to answer that, so that's why I was kind of holding back, because I'm not a real big fan of doing something like that, but I can't really describe why I'm not a fan of it, other than that I don't really like large restrictions on things. At the same time, I think that if it's a physician-owned, I hate to say, but I think maybe the intentions may be a little bit different. More of a profit-based kind of a feeling. I don't know.
Fear is that if a physician owned the facility, that there are laws against self-referral, and those are the Stark laws. And the whole idea that that a doctor owner could profit and benefit financially and personally
Right.
by directing patients to his or her own company.
Right. Or accepting only a certain type of patient.
Right.
Or a certain type of disease or something like that. So I'm not a fan of it, but then I kind of am. So sorry,
Yeah,
that's a wishy-washy kind of an answer, but I wasn't.
Any other thoughts on that question?
That was kind of response too. Like it's kind of like I'm on the fence. Like I could see it. I could see why you would have constraints, and then why it would be like. I mean, kind of the same as what Cheryl just said. That's what I have pretty much written down.
I don't necessarily agree with start to violation there, specifically because of the fact that if you're physician owned and you refer within the facility, you basically can only charge CMS rates or based on 2 times CMS rates. And if you're at an NPO hospital, not-for-profit hospital, and you refer within the hospital is billing facility codes, which actually increases the profitability and reimbursement on the back end by sometimes 30% more than when you would for self-referral for start to violation. So I thought, I'm not one to get in this conversation with a lot of people on this because I did not like the ACA in many ways, and I won't go down that road, but I did not agree with that at all.
Well, don't confuse billing codes with self-referral, because those are 2 separate issues now. So
I'm not, man. What I'm saying, Doc, is that if I refer within my own, it's no different than if I work as an internal medicine physician in a hospital and that patient needs surgery, I'm referring that patient to the same hospital for the surgery.
Yeah.
And if I own my own hospital and I have privilege, or I own my own clinic and I have privilege at the hospital and I go see the patient, the hospital makes their money. I make my money as a physician.
Right.
So, but the problem with going to hospitals is there are facility codes in hospitals that can be billed to where a normal test may be $400 in my facility as a physician-owned facility. If I go to the hospital and I get seen there, that same $400 test, maybe $400 plus additional $800 of facility code the hospital has that the clinic couldn't have.
Okay, so you're saying a hospital still, that it's not physician-owned, has ways or avenues to charge and
Sure.
I deal with them every day.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I will say that certainly in the past that there were opportunities for physicians, particularly groups of physicians, to do great things um, by actually funding and owning hospitals. The best example I can think of that is Women's Hospital in Houston. It was created and built by and initially owned by a group of OBGYNs, and they literally built the hospital right next door to their group practice because they felt they had very strong opinions about how women in labor and women who had any sort of obstetrical issues should be cared for, and a specialty hospital like that, could provide a unique and dedicated attention to those patients, and it was constantly winning accolades. It was the most popular place to have. It was the baby hospital in Houston for the longest time. The hospital has since been sold to HCA, or Hospital Corporations of America, and those physicians still have a very close affiliation with that hospital. But that's an example of where a group of doctors came together, dedicated to serve a certain group of patients. They didn't build that hospital to make money. They built it because they wanted to design a hospital that allowed them to practice OBGYN the way they felt it should be practiced. So
In that case, I think I think that's great,
yeah,
but as with any industry, things get a little skewed and people get a little greedy,
they do.
but that could be with a non-physician owned hospital,
Yeah.
like Chuck said too. So
Right. Well, so just moving along then, the next question really, let's jump over advanced directives because I think it kind of ties into long-term issues, but and jump to HCAP. One of you had actually referred to HCAP in your essay that you submitted. So, and what does that stand for?
Hospital consumer assessment of healthcare providers and systems.
Right. That's great. And so what does it do, or what are the priorities of HCAP? Why was it created?
To measure like the patient's perception of their hospital's experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a nutshell. And what did that kind of reporting allow for? It was a real first when it was created.
well, it
Survey.
helps with the increased quality of care.
Quality, and what else did I hear come through? Mary, were you trying
That was Mary. Yeah.
I wasn't answering the question correctly.
Oh,
I was saying they do surveys in order to get that data.
right. And it's random surveys that are just randomly sent out to patients within, I think, 48 hours of discharge.
It allows the consumers to express their experiences and pretty much requires a standard of care that could otherwise be overlooked if they didn't require or didn't have a survey or something to pretty much hold everybody accountable.
Right, accountability. That's the really word I was looking for. It provided for accountability and also an element of transparency. Transparency is a word that's used a lot in a lot of different circles, but in healthcare, it is especially important so that we see what's really going on. We see what people hear or record what people are experiencing, and so the accountability and transparency that is allowed, and it's comparative data too, because the same 27 or 28 questions are asked of in every instance, so you can compare the responses, compare a hospital all the way on the other side of the country or across town. And are there any other comments about HCAP or your encounters with HCAP data? There are lots of PhDs who use HCAP data because it allows them to do all sorts of research, what would be considered secondary research, because the data already exists. It's publicly accessible, and anybody can dive into it, download it, and manipulate the data and analyze it in a wide variety of ways. So we are constantly unearthing new discoveries from the data, and also trends and changes in patient experiences. Okay, so moving back to the question, what are advanced directives and why are they important?
What the patient wishes regarding the continuation or the ending of their treatment, if they lack the ability to or capability to make decisions.
Right. So the authors of the book describe this in really 3 parts. They say advanced directives really encompass 3 things. One has to do with those plans or desires for treatment. In other words, do they want to have continued treatment if it's a terminal kind of illness and that sort of thing. And then there's also the do not resuscitate order. What does that signify? What is that all about?
DNRs.
Mm-hmm.
They basically state that if a patient is in a position where they code or they become unresponsive to the point of death, that you will not try to revive the patient. But most patients forget to take them with them. So.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and hospitals are really insisting now upon admission that those documents be supplied if they don't already have them in your medical record, which is one of the advantages of being part of a system that is not only hospital-based but includes your primary care doctor and other doctors you've seen, because all of that information will already be there. But yeah, so it really is all about making sure that people have a chance to establish their plans and desires while their cognition is still intact, and communicate that at a time when they're still able to communicate. Because it creates a nightmare, as at least one of the supplemental articles indicated, written by a doctor in the ER. Suddenly, should he intubate a patient or not? And that was, did you all read that article? It was, but it puts a great burden on the provider and stress in those situations. So what can a hospital do to address some of the difficult ethical problems related to end-of-life treatment?
Well, they usually ask you, do you have a living will?
Right, that's what we're talking about. A living will is part of the advanced directives. So making sure upon admission and reminders to the primary care doctor, you need to make sure you meet with your patient often. You need to make sure that they've talked about this with their family members or their spouse. And what else can hospitals or healthcare systems do?
Well, I think it just needs to basically be a topic of conversation from, like you said, with your primary care, or even when you're young and healthy. I mean, I know your ideas and your ideals change as you get older, and you might want something at one point and then you might not want it at another, but I think it has to become a comfortable conversation between doctors and patients. Right. And oftentimes I feel like it's not a comfortable conversation because nobody likes to talk about the thought of them not being here anymore or them dying, But but I think it's really important. And so I feel like the sooner that you start doing it and the more you do it, the
Mhm.
easier it becomes to have that conversation.
Yeah, and why do you think that only 40%, if that, percent of the population actually have advanced directives, such as a living will and DNR kind of, and a medical power of attorney? Why do you think? I mean, most people.
I think people don't think about it.
Yeah, people don't think about it, and they wait until it's
Mm-hmm.
it's just such a hard conversation for people to have, and they wait until it's too late.
Mhm.
Or you think that it's going to be when you're 90. You know,
Right.
I mean, you never know. So that's why I think it's just
Right.
really important to start young,
Yeah.
however, whatever that age would be for that person, but just to have the conversation either with a family member, friends, whoever, just start talking.
Right. Most estate attorneys now, if they're drawing up a will for someone, they will definitely recommend, if not insist, that you have a durable medical power of attorney established in advance, and that a living will be part of your estate plans and your will. So what else could happen? What about public health messages? Should we have messages that are out there, billboards? Do you have a will? Who's your medical power of attorney?
I think for a lot of people, actually, just because the legalese involved, people assume, even though these things don't, people assume they cost a lot of money. They're not very expensive. But whenever you think lawyer, you think, oh, this is going to cost a lot of money. I think that's one of the biggest misnomers, and lack of education on that is a living will costs $99.
Good
I mean, most people don't know that, but that's all it costs is $99.
And that may be at the heart of some of the best messaging that could be put out there, is you can't afford not to do this.
Right.
Yeah. And
So once again, not being educated about it, just educating the public about it.
That's right. That's right. Okay, let's fly through some of these slides then, and then we'll move on to the next one. Let's see now. I want to make sure that I've had these things up here so long. I hate that sound. All right, are you all seeing the slides advance on your side?
I
Yes.
am. Mm-hmm.
Everybody is? Okay, so we talked about the different categories of hospitals. I don't know that we touched on regulation, but there are numerous regulatory bodies that govern a hospital. And require that pharmacy services are supervised by registered pharmacists, for example. The food services are separately regulated. You got to have nutritionists and so forth. So, and we talked about all the cost cutting that had been introduced. And this came out, early on. One of the early chapters talked about the transition, how the early hospitals were more like social welfare places where the homeless lived and that sort of thing. And the hospitals up through the early 1980s, the number of hospitals expanded greatly because of what? What are the 6 main factors that really fueled the growth in the number of hospitals? One of the big things had to do with medical education, because all of a sudden the medical community was organized and doctors were saying, we've got to have medical education has to be formalized, and we need to have teaching hospitals, and suddenly we needed all these hospitals, and we need a place for all this technology that was expand rapidly. So between the advances in medical education and advances in medical science and technology, there was a lot. What else was happening? during the 60s, 70s, especially the 60s, what happened? So Medicare came into being, right?
More people had access to
Yeah.
healthcare.
Yeah, so suddenly the elderly, they could, Medicare was going to pay for hospitals. And then Medicaid, that got signed in 1965. Suddenly the poor and the elderly could be hospitalized and doctors would get paid. So, yeah. So now hopefully you can see some of the things you heard about in an earlier chapter. Now it's all starting to sort of come together. And then in the mid-'80s, holy smokes, we realized that healthcare costs were going up and we better get a handle on them. And that's when folks started looking at the length of stay and pushing, oh my gosh, now we go to a prospective payment system, changes in reimbursement. Oh, these hospitals are too small. They're not efficient enough. So, and generally you should know, you should understand these kinds of terms like length of stay. It's sort of self-explanatory, but it's based on the number of patient days in total that a hospital is billed by, divided by the number of discharges. An average daily census, what is that?
How many patients are in there? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
It's kind of like a hotel. It's like the percent occupancy. How many beds are full? How many rooms are full? That's daily census, okay? So those are, we talked about length of stay. That's something that got an awful lot of attention. We talked about all the different types of hospitals. Trying to think of things that are on the exam. I think you all know this stuff pretty well because you did a good job of discussing the different ways that hospitals can be classified and what community hospital really means. And Cheryl mentioned the multi-unit affiliation, which has become increasingly popular. Types of service. Mary talked about types of hospitals based on service. And length of stay, we talked about short stay. Short stay hospital would be your typical acute care. Okay, swing beds. It can go either way, flexibility. And size, teaching hospitals. So there's some 400 hospitals that are members of the Council of Teaching Hospitals. And they tend to be in urban areas. And they also, if you're a teaching hospital, you get an extra kick in reimbursement from the government for the Medicare patients that on the basis that they have multiple comorbidities, in other words, and they're good teaching subjects as a result. There aren't so many osteopathic hospitals anymore. In fact, they've really been mainstreamed. But there was a time when those were freestanding hospitals. This is a term that you need to know for the final exam. Allopathic medicine, which tends to be an intervention to treat a disease or treat an illness, as opposed to more preventive care, more holistic care, which is philosophically the osteopathic approach to care. But just remember, allopathic has to do with taking Sorry. Okay. Any questions or other comments about hospitals? In general, the power in a hospital, the authority, the management structure has passed from being largely in the hands of the board of trustees, or really it started with the physicians having much more influence, and then it moved to a board of trustees, and now there tends to be a professional administrator, may not even have an MD degree by background, but perhaps a doctorate in health administration, much more of a business person in charge. So hospital management concept has really changed over time. And the principle of ethics really goes back to the Hippocratic Oath, which is based on do no harm. And whatever you do, make sure that the benefits outweigh the potential for harm or the risk that you expose a patient to, which is one of the chief areas of decision, say in the case of cancer treatments. Do you keep doing chemo and surgery and radiation? You know, how much of a toll does it take on the patient's ability to just cope? And there's now a body of research that suggests that with patients that are terminal, that they don't live any longer staying in the hospital. And so you may as well discharge them and let them be in a more peaceful setting with perhaps palliative care. And that is on the final exam. I'm sure it is. What is palliative care?
End of life care.
Comfort care.
Comfort
basically.
care. It may not be end of life. Oftentimes it is, but palliative care, because it may just extend over a lengthy period of time. But it's where you're mainly treating the pain, providing as much comfort as possible. There's no active intervention or treatment, if you will, of some pathogen.
And Dr. Muller, I just want to say that that's one thing that I think that people have a hard time understanding is palliative care.
Mm-hmm.
as a general population, and I'm saying that from personal experience with my own family, dealing with my dad when he had prostate cancer, and he eventually passed away from complications of prostate cancer. But I was for many months, trying to get some sort of palliative care for him, but he had somebody else in his ear telling him that wasn't a good thing, and so I feel like he went through a lot more than he should have, and his quality of life was greatly decreased because of it, because I just don't think people understand it. My family members didn't understand what it was, and I obviously didn't do a great job of explaining what it was, but yeah, I think that needs to be another discussion that the general population needs to have.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point, Cheryl, that it's not necessarily part of advanced directives, but there's every reason that it should be, because it's so important to once again get knowledgeable about what it means, and also when it's entirely appropriate, because other family members cannot make an easy decision for you, and inevitably there will be disagreement about that, and it's very stressful on everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hear you. Been there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see now. This is when I always have that moment. I want to make sure I don't screw up. Let's see.
This is when Chuck intervenes.
Oh, man.
Wait a minute. I think I got it. I think I did it. Wait a minute. Okay, there we go. Yeah. All right, now whose dog is that? We heard that
Sorry.
dog. We heard that dog last time. Okay, well, quickly in the
That was
interest of
me.
time, let's go to these questions. This is not a very long or complicated chapter on long-term. But as a segue to that last comment, how might the valuable discussion between patients and their physicians about end-of-life preferences be best facilitated? And if you read that article by Dr. Tinetti, do you agree that doctors should be reimbursed for their time that they spend discussing this in advance with patients?
Yes.
Others?
I disagree. I think that kind of goes along with their line of work. I think they are already being compensated for. When
Is that Mary or is that Mary?
it's Crystal.
Crystal?
Yeah.
How do others of you feel?
I'm interested to hear why Chuck said no.
Yes.
Or why he said
Oh,
yes.
yeah,
Sorry.
he said-
Why did you say, I'm interested to hear that point of view.
So basically, here's the problem now: is providers' reimbursements have been cut so much. Again, I deal with this on a daily basis, that they are doing the best they can in the limited amount of time they have, and so it's unfortunate. But the difference between a 99214 and a 99213 is significant reimbursement. When you think about it, it's $34 per patient, but the time is inadequate. And so when a provider is trying to see a patient specifically for, let's say they come in for a boo-boo on the leg, and the patient complains about something in the shoulder, the provider can't see the patient for the leg and the shoulder at the same time because CMS doesn't allow them to do so. So we have to be in a position now, reimbursement's been cut so much that we have to somehow preemptively and proactively approach providers to where we can pay them for those things so they don't get so caught up in the active therapy, and so they're more preemptive and proactive. And I would much rather a provider spend 10 minutes with my father explaining what's going on with his knee and then talk about what's going on down the future than to spend 15 minutes talking about his knee and then getting on to the next patient.
So you're giving that example of multiple problems synonymous with an end-of-life discussion. Is that?
I'm saying that basically
that's
providers.
added on in addition to whatever else somebody comes for. Okay.
Yes, I'm saying that we have to get in a position where we're not holding doctors liable for time, so they'll spend more time talking about other things, and the only way we can do that is through slight reimbursement.
Right. Yeah.
That's my take on it.
Yeah.
That's an
I think that
interesting
it all
point.
goes along with this is what they signed up for. Like the
So does
I'm
that mean
saying
that they should work for?
I'm not saying work for free, but along with being a doctor is you diagnose me with whatever I have, and if a part of that diagnosis says that perhaps end of life, that may happen, or that may be a part of my diagnosis. It's a part of your job to discuss that with me. That's a part of being the doctor.
Okay, so, and I understand that, Crystal. So you're a dental hygienist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're doing a scale and root plane on me, but you charge me 4 quadrants when you have to anesthetize me based on quadrants, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I come in, you're going to charge me based on my quadrant for a scale and root plane. Well, why not charge me one time up front and then give me my other 3 for free? Because you're spending that time on me on those other 3 appointments, right?
Well, yeah, but before I do all 4, I discuss exactly what's going to happen in the beginning. I go over everything, the full phase of everything what's happening in the beginning, and then I break it down.
Yeah, but you're gonna do that every time I come in. You're gonna give me counseling on how to floss properly, even though you did it the first time. You're gonna do the same things each time,
Yeah,
right?
I give a refresher every time.
Yep.
I told my dental hygienist to stop telling me about flossing because I'm not going to do it, and I never will do it. And she may as well save her time. But I see, yeah, and I see where both of you are coming from. I do think, though, we have to make sure that professionals are adequately compensated for their time and effort with the patient, regardless of what that entails. I think what Crystal is saying, that coverage of that topic should be embedded in how the doctor is being compensated and not billed separately. Is that also
Right. Right.
Well, maybe there should also be someone who could even specialize in that form of communication, that topic, to
right?
take the burden off of the doctor then, so that
Well,
the doctor can talk about all those things. And
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like
And
a physician's assistant or a social worker or,
Well,
someone like
yeah.
that.
And increasingly that's happening, particularly in an inpatient kind of setting. There are social workers, there are ethicists, there are counselors who are facilitating that kind of discussion, and that's their job. So,
Which I think is to the point of Chuck, where, doctors need to do the things that they need to do. Not that this isn't part of their job, but to help them be more efficient and do their jobs better, they need a little more help. So get somebody else in there that can spend the time that the patient deserves to have that conversation. Patient doesn't want to feel rushed having that conversation because it's an important one.
on the other hand, and I'll say this, particularly in the case of older patients, they don't want to talk about that subject with just any old stranger.
Right.
And they really trust their doctor, and they want to be sure that their doctor, that they have that discussion with their doctor, because if the plug is going to get pulled, it's getting pulled by the doctor, so to speak.
Right. But I think that's why it's important to have somebody brought in throughout their time seeing that doctor. I mean, just introduce somebody that they can know and grow with, maybe on other topics as well, besides that.
Yeah.
So that they do feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And not to take away from it, but Crystal, after this class, I'm actually may need a scale root plan, so I might call you for some service.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe Crystal could convince me to floss my teeth. Hey, the next question.
The water pick is easier.
I've heard that.
Oh, she tried to sell me that the last time. So the next question, this is one of the exam questions. It may even be one of the essay questions. What's the difference between informal versus formal care? And, how do we address this issue of more and more people growing old and needing long-term care, and so few people have long-term care insurance? So what's the difference between the two? What is informal care versus formal? What do you think that means?
Informal is non-reimbursed care.
Yep, non-reimbursed.
Non-reimbursed, that's a good way to think about it. And it tends to be provided by volunteers, whether they're family members or, like a spouse or an aunt or a niece or a daughter or a son. That's informal care. Typically not in any facility, because if it's in a facility, it's much more formal care. It's a licensed facility that exists to provide care, and there's payment for X amount, and there's actually a contract, if you will. It tends to be residential, but it can be in-home care and long-term care, right? It doesn't have to be a nursing home. It doesn't have to be a long-term care hospital. What about this question? Should all employers, especially those with more than 50 employees, be required to grant extended family leave for such circumstances, just as they do for military service? How do you all feel about that?
I feel like they should.
This is something that the chambers of commerce across the country have really argued against, that the Family Leave Act and anything like this is a burden on employers. Um,
I feel like they should. I feel like you never really need it until you need it. And I mean, nobody really knows the effect of it until they have a child or a parent or something that is sick and needs their care. So
right. And what happens when an employee is totally distracted, or they come to work and they're constantly on their cell phone trying to
Right.
deal with mom or dad's problem, or trying to line up home care nurses while they're on the job or supposed to be working?
Right.
What happens to the quality of their work?
they're still not productive. So they're still losing. The company's still not profiting.
Yeah, and they might be making bad mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called presentism. I just came across that term recently in doing some research on workforce wellness, that it's not absenteeism because they came to work, they clocked in, but they're really not there. Their mind is somewhere else, their attention is somewhere else, and it impacts the quality, it impacts productivity, it impacts everything in the workplace almost as much as if they didn't even come to work. Maybe even more so, because they have an impact on the people around them. What accounts for the slow growth in the number of people or the percentage of people who have private long-term care insurance?
Affordability.
Affordability is a big factor. And this is an exam question.
You have too many options.
Too many options, hard to understand. What else? Cheryl referred to this problem earlier when she was answering a different question. What is it that we need more of as a nation and we just don't have? Education, right? People aren't educated. They think that Medicare is going to cover them when they need to be in a nursing home or provide, long-term care.
Yeah.
It can if you do it the right way.
Well, if you need more than 90 days, or you can keep going in and out of the hospital, but then the hospitals are going to get fined too, right? Readmission. Yeah. And psychologically, what do you think goes on in people's heads, especially young people, even if they could afford it?
Well, they don't think that you don't think about stuff like that when you're younger. You don't think you're ever going to need it.
Yeah,
because if
think
you're
they're
healthy
invincible.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a real problem. It's confusing. It's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Many think that, they're ignorant. They don't quite understand what it covers and what it doesn't, and when it kicks in. Some people think that they never are going to need it. So one of the things that I've witnessed in teaching the structure of the U.S. healthcare delivery system is that younger people in general just don't relate to the aging process. That's one of the reasons why I posted the question that I did for this big paper you all have about how age-friendly is your city, just to elevate the consciousness of young people. What could be done to encourage more in younger generations to take a more active role in aging management, or even pursue a career in geriatrics or gerontology or healthy living or healthy aging, active aging?
Yeah. Once again, I said education. Go into the younger, maybe the elementary schools, have them do something with a retirement facility, try to get that kind of relationship built, because maybe some kids don't have grandparents or they don't see their grandparents, but trying to bring the generations together in a healthy way so that they can see what's going on, and starting young and then continuing that throughout their school career would maybe be a way to do that.
how might businesses play a role in encouraging that? What's an idea? Think about it from a marketing point of view. What might you do as a business?
You can do brand integration.
Okay.
So it's where basically you get people to volunteer or do fundraisers, things like that, or awareness trends with older age population specifically to broaden your brand.
Yeah, that's one thing. One thing that you could do if you're a retailer, let's say you're a movie theater or a restaurant, you might offer a discount to younger people if they have a senior at their table with them, so that you encourage more generation kind of socialization and mix it up. So you get a discount if you eat with a senior. Bring your grandma on your date.
Aw.
Oh, me. But anyhow, be sure that you cover there's a good discussion throughout, not just this chapter, but earlier chapters about the demographic trends that have tended to move us more in the direction of formal care rather than informal care. And it has to do with everything from the shrinking pool of informal caregivers. I mean, women who've traditionally been in that role, we're all working full time. And you've got dual career households. You've got a higher divorce rate than we experienced in this country 50 years ago. And families are broken up and living separately from each other. So grandmother is living clear on the other side of the country from the grandchildren, or at least it's a plane flight away. You can't just easily get there.
Less people are having children too.
Right.
They're
Yes.
not extending their families.
Right. And, it's pretty alarming. I don't know if you recall reading, 40% of people with dementia are going to need some type of formal care. In other words, families, it just breaks, they snap. There's only so much that they can do, especially with Alzheimer's. And the prevalence of Alzheimer's is increasing, not decreasing in this country. Okay, so let's quickly run through some of these slides then. One of the things that I think is very interesting, not only are we seeing the use of more evidence-based practice in long-term care, not just relying on I won't call it folklore, but certain things that have been passed down over the years. Now it has to be research-based. But there's also technology to help with lifting, and so that the caregivers are not strained, or with monitoring. The beds in nursing facilities, they don't necessarily require a patient care provider or an aide or nurse to actually be at bedside. They can monitor from a nurse's station. But long-term care includes a whole host of areas of care. There always needs to be ongoing therapeutic care just to keep those aging muscles working. And then respite care for the caregivers themselves. You need to know what the different activities of daily living are. So what are the 5 activities of daily living? Who could name them? Well, bathing is one.
Eating,
Dressing, feeding.
Dressing, feeding,
putting clothes on.
and toileting. Yeah.
Toileting.
And then one has to be able to transfer himself or herself safely from a chair to a bed and back from a bed to a chair. So, and the activities of daily living have been in recent years expanded to include several others, like being able to manage your finances, to be able to write a check, or, maintain your understand cash flow and so forth. And the textbook talks about some of the trends here. The increase in the recent growth has been in assisted living, but not in continuing care retirement communities. Why would you think that's true? Any guess? Those continuing care communities tended to guarantee that you would be taken care of no matter how long you lived. And with people living as long as my mother-in-law, 101, they're losing money on her now. They are losing money because she has run out of money, and they promised that they would look after her. And she now is at the highest level of care in skilled care. Assisted living, on the other hand, provides only what's needed and only to a certain extent. It doesn't include skilled beds. And as I said, home care has really been exploding because it bridges that gap between, when somebody doesn't have any long-term care insurance. And they don't want to go into a facility. They want to stay at home.
And honestly, that's what I want to do. I want to age in place at home.
Yeah, well, I think everybody really would like to stay at home. A lot just depends on whether you can stay safely in your home, and whether you're going to end up being shut in and missing that stimulation and socialization to keep the mind active. That's where these adult daycare centers are so cool, and senior centers. It provides for that socialization, maybe some meals, one good meal a day. They have counseling. You might have a talk about palliative care, or what is hospice, when do I need to consider hospice care for a spouse? And area agencies on aging are typically the ones that orchestrate the Meals on Wheels or contract for it. And Meals on Wheels can be delivered to group settings like these senior centers, as well as to individuals at home. And there's an increasing number of companies, for-profit and not-for-profit, that have gotten into the so-called homemaker services. Not necessarily anything that would ever, be covered per se by a long-term care policy, but to just sort of manage a private home environment. My mother had gotten to the point where she just, she couldn't change. Getting a light bulb changed was a major issue for her. There are different models, and long-term care does include case management to coordinate the delivery of services and make sure that people are getting the right level of service at the time that they need it. The Affordable Care Act did try to encourage more long-term care health insurance to be undertaken by individuals, but it still hasn't been enough to take hold. It is costly. I think the rest of this, any questions or additional comments about what you read, any of the articles?
Not for me.
Okay. All right. What about the paper? Is everybody okay You got those papers underway? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Didn't realize you had an assignment? It's coming up. No. Okay, so those papers are due this weekend. If you ever have a problem with Dropbox, just shoot me an email.
And they're due at by 6 on Sunday.
You do what on Sunday?
They're due on Sunday.
Right, Sunday, yeah. Yeah. Okay, and then after that, once you turn in your papers, you don't even have 10 days left. Then,
Wow.
of course, this is like you're just blowing through this so fast.
That was fast.
Yeah. Okay, and I will make sure that we carve out time in the last lecture for a very quick cursory review, but it won't be, the whole 2 hours or whatever. Okay, I finished right on time. Hooray for me.
Wow.
All right.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Hoorah. And Chuck, you got 5 minutes less than everybody else.
Even with me talking so much, you still finished. That's just impressive.
Okay, we have to figure out what was wrong with Jordan's audio, or
Right.
When you come on board, if you first come on and you don't hit the join audio conference by computer, and you don't have the code to get in by phone, you can watch it, but it won't engage you, and you can't hear on the computer at all.
I'll shoot her an email and tell her just that. Yeah, that may be.
Yeah, isn't it a little green button, Chuck?
It is, but like it depends on what you're on. Like if you're on certain types of like tablets, then both of them will show up green. If you're on a computer, you'll have one green, one red. If you're on an iPhone, I don't know how they show up. I'm not an Apple guy, so I don't know.
Yeah,
she definitely can.
Well, Crystal, will you start on your phone when you're driving your car? Or do you
Yeah,
have
I'm
an
on
iPhone?
iPhone. Yeah, but I log in through the link you have.
So,
But it does prompt me to join with audio, and I do.
audio. Yeah, I thought you got the prompt, because I even get the prompt.
But there's two buttons, so if you push the wrong one accidentally, you can't go back unless you start the whole thing over again.
Right.
Oh, good to know.
Okay. All right. Well, you all jump off, go work on those papers. I want these papers to be as excellent as your essays and infographics were. I read everybody's at least 3 times each. That's how much I enjoyed it. So, I always learn from what you all deliver. So that's important to me. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Muller.
Okay.
Thanks,
I
Dr. Muller.
look
Thanks,
forward to
everyone.
reading more then. Thank you very much.
Have a good week, everybody.
Yeah. Stay
Bye,
well.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.